From timely academic dramas to Oscar-winning Pixar classics, there's plenty to chew on this week at the movies, and I'm here to cover all of them on this week's episode of Film Feeder. Hello, welcome back to Film Feeder, and if this is your first time listening, then thanks so much for checking us out. This is the show where every week I, your film chef extraordinaire Jack Martin, serve up all the information about the newest releases coming to cinemas, streaming and on demand, as well as my thoughts on one or two new releases. And this week, the countdown to the Oscars has officially begun, as we are now less than a week until the envelopes are opened and the gold statuettes are handed to their worthy recipients, which could include Christopher Nolan's historic biopic Oppenheimer, Greta Gerwig's massively successful Barbie, and numerous other contenders from The Holdovers to Anatomy of a Fall. So I hope you've got your ballots ready to predict who will take home Oscar gold this coming Sunday, when the Oscars will be broadcast in the UK at its new home on ITV, which picked up the broadcast rights from Sky last year. Now, last month I recorded a special feature presentation episode with fellow critics Austin Belzer and Ayush Sharma, where we went through some of the top Oscar nominations and delivered our predictions for those main categories. So if you want to listen to us talk about them, then by all means listen to that episode now on whichever streaming platform you're listening on. I'm also excited to announce that I'll be dropping the second feature presentation episode later this week. This is a separate strand where once a month, I and a special guest or two will be discussing some interesting topics set within the world of film. And for March's episode, I'm very excited to be joined by Billie Melissa Rogan as we talk about her exciting career as a filmmaker and her recent short film I Love You Guys, which has recently become available to watch on YouTube, as well as a number of other films that cover various areas of social injustice, a topic that is dear to both mine and Billy's hearts. So keep an ear out for this latest enthralling episode when it drops later on this week. Now, before we move on to this week's roundup of films, I'd like to encourage anyone listening to follow Film Feeder on our many social media channels, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and others, and you can find all the handles and links in the episode description. And also consider supporting Film Feeder over on Patreon at patreon.com/filmfeeder, where paid subscribers can get early access to feature presentation episodes, as well as special video recordings of said episodes that are not available anywhere else on the internet, as well as a whole other bunch of goodies. So once again, that's patreon.com/filmfeeder if you're up for supporting a hard-working creative like myself. And finally, of course, don't forget to visit the Film Feeder website at filmfeeder.co.uk, where I post my written reviews each and every week, including the recent VOD release American Star, as well as my analytical write-ups on Dune Part 2 and Spaceman, which I reviewed on last week's episode. So please do visit the website today, once again at filmfeeder.co.uk. So now let's open up this week's movie menu and see what's on offer.
And now, preview time. When it comes to entertainment, you can't beat a good film. So let's take a look at what's coming your way.
This week, Oscar-nominated filmmaker Ava DuVernay is leading the charge with her latest drama, Origin, which is Film Feeder's Movie of the Week. And it is the powerful and timely story of academic Isabel Wilkerson, portrayed in the film by Ingenue Ellis-Taylor, as she crafts her best-selling non-fiction book, Caste: The Origins of Our Discontents, which details the disturbing hierarchical systems throughout history that have gone on to shape modern American racism. But in case you're not already sold on the latest Ava DuVernay project, then allow me to give you 5 solid reasons why Origin is a film you should be excited for. Number 1, this isn't just your run-of-the-mill adaptation of Wilkerson's non-fiction book, for DuVernay, who also wrote the script and produced the film, takes further inspiration from aspects of Wilkerson's own life, including her tragic relationship with husband Brett Hamilton, played by John Bernthal, and her own struggles to get people interested in her very niche and complex topic, which makes it a somewhat unique film that isn't a straightforward adaptation of the book itself. Number 2, it features a magnetic lead performance by Ingenue Ellis-Taylor, who previously scored an Oscar nomination for her supporting role opposite Will Smith in King Richard, with the actor beautifully capturing the frustrations that Isabel Wilkerson went through as she conducted extensive research into her magnum opus, as well as a number of heartbreaking experiences with love and loss in between the academia, which makes for compelling and emotional entertainment. Number 3, it isn't just Ellis Taylor and Bernthal who are the main acting attraction, but also a whole bunch of recognisable faces among the ensemble cast, including Audra McDonald, Vera Farmiga, Jasmine Cephas-Jones, Finn Wittrock, Connie Nielsen, and Nick Offerman, all of whom show up in small but significant roles across Wilkerson's journey throughout the film, and provide a meaningful, if not always easy, perspective on the themes and topics that she uncovers. Number 4, it's a must-watch for anyone who has in fact read Wilkerson's book, which itself became a huge best-selling hit with readers upon its debut in 2020, enough to where the likes of Oprah Winfrey and Barack Obama listed it among their top books of that year, which is high praise indeed for any author, let alone Wilkerson, so it's a film that surely has the seal of approval from two of the most influential figures in the world. And finally, the 5th reason to check out Origin in cinemas is because it is Ava DuVernay operating at the height of her filmmaking power, and she has crafted an important and vital film for audiences to get stuck into and become emotionally attached towards. So if you've been with her from the beginning of her career all the way to her Oscar-nominated films Selma and 13th, and even her less successful adaptation of A Wrinkle in Time, then this is essential viewing for DuVernay loyalists as well as audiences in general. So those are my 5 reasons why you should be excited for Origin, which bows in UK and Irish cinemas via distributor Black Bear on Friday the 8th of March. The week's other cinema releases are led by the chilling new supernatural horror Imaginary, which comes from mega producer Jason Blum and his ever-fruitful production company Blumhouse, and filmmaker Jeff Wadlow, who's made a bunch of films already for Blum, including Truth or Dare and Fantasy Island, and now brings to the screen an original tale starring DeWanda Wise as a woman who moves back into her childhood home with her new family, only for her stepdaughter Alice, played by Piper Braun, to discover and start playing with her old stuffed teddy bear named Chauncey, which turns out to be far from cuddly as it begins influencing Alice to play some dangerous games, and then turns out to have a pretty dark origin story. So for those not won over by Blumhouse's Night Swim from earlier this year, which funnily enough that film's writer and director Bryce Maguire is also a co-writer on this one, then Imaginary should hopefully provide you with all the demented horror that you may have been wanting all along. So make sure you have the time to play with Imaginary when Lionsgate releases it in cinemas on Friday the 8th of March. Next, we're heading all the way over to Romania as acclaimed satirist Radu Jude presents his latest feature entitled Do Not Expect Too Much from the End of the World, which revolves around an overworked production assistant working on a new workplace safety video for a big multinational business. And it follows her across her hectic workday as she interviews several actors for the video and encounters a whole bunch of absurd figures who end up making her day more and more difficult. As with Radu Jude's other films, including his more recent COVID-19 satire, Bad Luck Banging or Loony Porn, this movie takes hard aim at life in contemporary Europe, where everything from baseless online conspiracies to corporate mismanagement to desperate TikTok personalities are all within the filmmaker's firing line. Though at 163 minutes long, it's sure to test the patience of many who prefer their satirical content to be short and straightforward. But nonetheless, you can decide for yourself when Sovereign Film Distribution releases Do Not Expect Too Much from the End of the World in cinemas from Friday the 8th of March. Next up, in time for International Women's Day, comes the crowd-pleasing new sports documentary Copa 71, which charts the largely forgotten 1971 Women's Football World Cup tournament that took place in Mexico City and boasted record attendance for footy fans of all creeds. But it also explores exactly why the sport-defining tournament has, until now, been lost to the history books, which sadly involves an uncomfortable amount of misogyny that ensured a whole generation of footballers would not be made aware of its existence. Luckily for us, there are plenty of people who still remember it, including many of the female players that competed in the tournament, as well as today's stars of women's football, who are all interviewed on camera by filmmakers James Erskine and Rachel Ramsey about their experiences and the tournament's overall inspiration, which should give current audiences a grand idea of what it must have been like to see sports history unfold in front of their eyes. So make sure you strike a goal with Copa 71 when Dogworth strikes it into cinemas on the 8th of March. Also out in time for International Women's Day is another historical tale of incredible sportsmanship, or sportswomanship in this case. It's Vindication Swim, the new film by director, writer, cinematographer and editor Elliot Halsler. who here recounts the story of Mercedes Gleitzer, portrayed by Kirsten Callahan, who in 1927 set out to become the first British woman to swim the English Channel, and faced a number of perils during her training, including the rough waters of the Channel, as well as an outrageous claim by a rival swimmer. Apparently, Callahan spent 3 years training for the part, which involved her swimming in the actual English Channel during production, and that level of dedication is certainly worthy of your respect for her as a performer, especially in her debut acting role. And not to mention, it's the perfect swimming biopic for those who just couldn't get into last year's Naiad. So make sure that Vindication Swim is on your to-watch list when it washes up into cinemas, thanks to Picnic Entertainment from the 8th of March. Then we're taking a look at the fascinating rise and fall story of a fashion icon in director Kevin MacDonald's new documentary High and Low John Galliano, which of course tells the story of the former head designer at Christian Dior. In fact, he was the first British man to hold that position in the French haute couture house, whose rampant addiction to drugs and alcohol contributed significantly to his very public downfall, after video footage of him drunkenly hurling anti-Semitic abuse circulated online and caused him to descend into the shadows. Until now, it seems, as MacDonald's Films seeks to present audiences with a whole new perspective on John Galliano, with the man himself, as well as several other interviewees, including Penelope Cruz, Charlize Theron, Kate Moss, and Naomi Campbell, offering deeper insight into his troubled psyche than ever before, which may just help rehabilitate his sullied public image. So, if you're ready to forgive and learn more about this complex and complicated man, then check out High and Low John Galliano in cinemas from the 8th, courtesy of distributor Mubi. And don't worry, the last of this week's cinema releases is a much lighter and more family-friendly affair, not to mention purely educational, as The Inventor takes children and adults on a colourful and imaginative animated adventure through the later life of legendary artist and inventor Leonardo da Vinci, with the film blending meticulously handcrafted stop motion with some illustrious 2D animation to help audiences of all ages learn more about a revered icon within the world of art and beyond. With a voice cast that includes the likes of Daisy Ridley, Matt Berry, Marion Cotillard, and Stephen Fry as Da Vinci himself, all under the watchful eye of writer-director Jim Capobianco, who was nominated for an Oscar as a co-writer of Pixar's Ratatouille, The Inventor is inclusive and endearing edutainment that families can easily enjoy when it swings into cinemas from Friday the 8th of March, via distributor Park Circus Films. Moving on now to streaming releases. There's only a couple to spotlight this week, but they're still pretty massive deals, including Netflix's new fantasy action thriller Damsel, which comes from filmmaker Juan Carlos Fresnadillo, who returns to directing after a decade-long absence, and stars Millie Bobby Brown as Elodie, a young noblewoman in a faraway fairy tale kingdom who agrees to marry the handsome Prince Henry, played by Nick Robinson, in a bid to unite both kingdoms. But before you can say that they lived happily ever after, it turns out that Elodie has been chosen by Henry's family, including his queen, who's Robin Wright, to be their latest sacrifice as part of an ancient debt. So she's thrown into a deep and inescapable pit that's occupied by a giant fire-breathing dragon, and now she must rely on her wits and strength to escape and bring revenge upon her new in-laws. With a cast that also includes Ray Winston, Brooke Carter, Sheree Agdashlu, and Angela Bassett, as well as gritty and rather gorgeous-looking visual effects, Damsel aims to be a fairy tale adventure unlike any other, so make sure that you spare some time to watch the film when it drops onto Netflix on the 8th of March. And then, over on Prime Video, Peter Farrelly, formerly one half of gross-out comedy kings The Farrelly Brothers, and now an Oscar-winning filmmaker thanks to Green Book, returns to his much more outwardly comedic domain with the release of Ricky Stenicki, a long-in-development project that has seen the likes of Jim Carrey and James Franco come and go from the lead roles, but has now settled on Zac Efron and John Cena, with Efron playing the leader of a group of friends who, ever since childhood, has relied on a fictional friend named Ricky Stenicki as an excuse for their wild behaviour, but when their bluff is finally called, they hire a washed-up actor, played by Cena, to play the elusive Ricky Stenicki himself, with expectedly disastrous results. Fans of classic Farrelly Brothers comedies like There's Something About Mary, Dumb and Dumber, and Shallow Hal will find themselves just as much at home with this film as Peter Farrelly clearly is, even without his brother Bobby Farrelly around to share the mayhem with. So if you're up for a rambunctious comedy that holds no prisoners, then be sure to stream Ricky Stenicki on Prime Video from Friday the 8th of March. And finally, the week's big theatrical re-release is Pixar's highly acclaimed spiritual drama Soul, which was originally scheduled for a cinematic release in 2020 before the pandemic scuppered those plans, with the film launching on Disney Plus instead. Not that it made a whole lot of difference, for the film gained Pixar some of its strongest reviews in years, as well as yet another Oscar for Best Animated Film, and also one for its original score by the unlikely trio of Jon Batiste, Trent Reznor, and Atticus Ross. However, with the pandemic now very much in the rearview mirror, Pixar is bringing some of their streaming-only releases to cinemas for the first time, which began with Turning Red last month and will continue with Luca next month. But now is the opportune time to experience Soul's stunning photorealistic animation and imaginative storytelling on the big screen, as well as a pair of lively vocal performances by Jamie Foxx and Tina Fey, who play souls who wind up on a journey of self-discovery together in the unlikeliest of fashions. So make plans to check out Soul on the big screen for the very first time from Friday the 8th of March. So with that, this week's movie menu comes to a close. Hopefully by now you've picked out which films you're eager to get in your stomach, whether it's at the cinema or in the comforts of your own home. And I truly wish you a happy film feast, no matter which film you decide to check out. And now, it's time for a lighter than usual look at my ever insightful reviews. I've only got one release to cover this week, and that film is last week's entry, Lisa Frankenstein, which comes from director Zelda Williams, making her feature debut here, and screenwriter Diablo Cody, who won an Oscar for Juno, and then went on to pen the cult classic Jennifer's Body. And it got me thinking about how, for a film to achieve cult film status, it must be organic over a period of time and not forced upon the audience right away. I mean, take Jennifer's Body, for instance. While the horror comedy wasn't a major success with critics and audiences at the time of its 2009 release, it has since been re-evaluated as a feminist classic in the wake of the Me Too movement, with the film now looked back upon fondly and sometimes religiously watched by a devoted fan base nearly 15 years since its debut. But if Jennifer's Body is a representation of how a cult classic can come about organically, even many years after the fact, then Lisa Frankenstein is an example of the exact opposite. Everything about it leading up to its release, including the writer's confirmation that the film apparently takes place in the same universe as Jennifer's Body, has felt like a desperate attempt by the filmmakers to cut corners and just have it be a cult classic right away, rather than wait years for it to find its audience. However, while the ingredients for a cult classic in the making are there, albeit forcibly so, the overall method that mixes them together just feels wrong, and it ends up being distracting with how much it doesn't ultimately work. Set in 1989, the film centers around Lisa Swallows, who's played by Katherine Newton. Now, she's a teenager who's still emotionally recovering from the gruesome murder of her mother some months prior, and in the meantime, her father has swiftly remarried a much nastier and rather vapid woman named Janet, played by Carla Gugino, whose own teen daughter Taffy, played by Liza Soberano, is a more popular cheerleader who, despite her attempts to befriend her new stepsister, has clearly inherited her mother's passive-aggressive behaviour. Nonetheless, Lisa's only source of comfort is the grave of a young man from the Victorian era, which is struck by lightning one night and awakens the mutilated corpse, played by Cole Sprouse, which eventually finds its way to a terrified Lisa. However, she soon finds the resurrected young man, who can't speak due to a missing tongue, among other missing appendages, to be rather alluring, and so they begin a strange romantic journey together to get him back to full health, which involves a faulty tanning bed and a little bit of cold-blooded murder, so that they can finally be together. It's easy to see why Lisa Frankenstein is being pushed so hard for instant cult classic status, because it has the kind of balmy premise and over-the-top 80s aesthetic that a lot of specialist audiences tend to be attracted to. The problem is, neither Diablo Cody's script nor director Zelda Williams seem to have the energy or even the sense of unconventional style to properly execute it to its fullest potential. For one, Cody relies heavily on her recognizable brand of idiosyncratic dialogue to make up for her script's otherwise lack of interesting characters, who all operate within an overly light narrative where they say and do things for sheer convenience towards the story. And Williams' direction also feels off, as from the very start there's a noticeably low energy in how certain actors deliver Cody's colourful dialogue, as well as how the camera moves around or remains in static positions. And even when the film gets a bit more creative with its overall style, including black and white dream sequences involving the famous moon image from Georges Méliès' silent film A Trip to the Moon, it rarely feels like the director is wholly engaged with the process, as it often comes off about as empty and lifeless as the corpse of Catherine Newton's Lisa becomes besotted with. But unlike the filmmakers, Newton is certainly not sleepwalking through this film, as she has a sweet charm that could have been played up a lot further by a more energized filmmaker. And the same can be said about Cole Sprouse, who does what he physically can as the creature, as he's so credited, a largely non-verbal role where most of his dialogue is made up of just grunts and other bodily noises. Most of the other actors are not given as much versatility, for under Williams' direction, their modes are either stilted or awkwardly over the top, most notably Carla Gugino in a cartoonishly theatrical evil stepmother role, where even her shoulder pads make her look like a villain from a traditional Disney fairy tale. And Cody's script is also partially at fault, for again the characters, including the two leads, are thinly written and have few dimensions outside of their very basic personalities, which few actors could realistically pull off within a writer-director combination that doesn't allow them to go as outlandish as the main concept suggests. Instead, Lisa Frankenstein feels like a pale, or paler, imitation of a Tim Burton film from the 2000s, to where the two leads at times even look a little bit like Johnny Depp and Helena Bonham Carter, and honestly there are parts in this movie that have a bit more passion to them than some of Burton's more recent films. What's frustrating though is that you can definitely see the potential for it to get as seriously twisted and gothic to a fault as a Tim Burton movie can be, except that it keeps itself at such a safe distance from any kind of truly messed up dark humour that you're always thinking about the opportunity that has been missed more than the scene itself. For instance, there's a scene later on where a particular body appendage is chopped off and then sewn onto Cole Sprouse for an intimate scene, but at no point does anyone properly acknowledge how insane the moment actually is, and just treats it like a normal romantic gesture in an average teen movie. Now, someone like Burton would have at least gone a bit more bonkers with that, or at least given it enough of a zany energy to make it darkly funny, but sadly Williams isn't up to the task, and along with Cody, she sinks the ship before it even has a chance to properly set sail. I mean, who knows, maybe one day Lisa Frankenstein will achieve cult status the same way that Jennifer's Body eventually did, but somehow, not least of all because it's a much less entertaining film, I don't think it will be as soon as the film is clearly hoping for it to be. So in all, Lisa Frankenstein is a disappointingly lifeless horror comedy that tries too hard to achieve instant cult film status. But Zelda Williams' awkward direction and dimension-free writing by Diablo Cody fail to give it the true spark of life, and it only gets 2 stars from me, which makes it a near flavourless dish. And that brings us to the end of yet another episode of Film Feeder. Thank you so much for listening about all of this week's releases, as well as my review for Lisa Frankenstein. And don't forget you can read much more about them all on the Film Feeder website at filmfeeder.co.uk, which is the only place where you can find all of my written content, including reviews and weekly movie menus. And also make sure that you're following Film Feeder on our many social media channels, all of which are listed in the episode description. And please do like and follow this podcast on wherever you're listening to it, as your support as always means the utter world to me. Also, a quick reminder that paid subscribers on our Patreon page at patreon.com/filmfeeder can get exclusive early access to feature presentation episodes, including the one with me and Billie Melissa Rogan that is publicly dropping later on this week. So if you want to hear us talk about a whole bunch of stuff before the rest of the world does, then visit patreon.com/filmfeeder and subscribe today. Do join me next week when I'll be looking at a whole bunch of exciting new releases, including Drive-Away Dolls, the latest comedy by one half of the Coen brothers. But until then, I'm Jack Martin, your film chef extraordinaire, whetting your appetite for film each and every week. That's all for now. See you next time.